all witnesses to history to some degree. And a few of us are lucky enough to get a front row seat. 20 years ago, a friend of mine had that kind of view to a slice of fascinating history that is unique to British Columbia's Kootenay region. My buddy had just arrived in Nelson to start a job as a journalist. He was assigned to cover this trial of an 81-year-old woman accused of arson. This old woman, Mary Braun, had taken an apartment across the street from a community college in the Slocan Valley. She fasted there and meticulously planned her crime. When she was ready, Mary Braun stripped naked, crossed the highway, and set the college ablaze. She didn't try to deny her crime because Braun was a member of a radical Doukhobor sect, one known as the Sons of Freedom, and in her mind, the burning of the college was a justifiable act. On his way to the courthouse for the trial, my journalist buddy caught a glimpse of this tiny octogenarian being led down the steps to the back door. Canadian reporters don't generally bark questions at people accused of crimes as they're led into court. We're more polite than that. But something compelled my friend that day to shout out, "Why'd you do it, Mary?"
"We're at war, don't you know?"
This bird-like little woman squeaked. And she had a point. The world was divided. It was a warring, uneasy place 2 decades ago. As a pacifist believer in the Sons of Freedom, Mary Braun's way of dealing with it was with nudity, and ironically, with fire. Sure enough, soon after she entered that courtroom, Braun stripped down in front of the judge and was tried and convicted of torching the college, as naked as the day she came into this world. Hi, my name is Mitchell Scott, the editor-in-chief of Kootenay Mountain Culture magazine. And on this Headwaters podcast, we're going to look into the largest and most fascinating group of people ever to arrive en masse to the Kootenays, the Doukhobors. They're a Christian-based sect of Russian immigrants who came to southeastern British Columbia a century ago and completely transformed the area. They got right to work, turning valleys into orchards, farms, and jam factories, and they prospered. But their pacifism, communal living, and refusal to bow down to government or even send their children to school soon put them at odds with the state. And as a result, each other. The very word Doukhobor means spirit wrestler, and the Doukhobors splintered, wrestled with themselves and governments trying to bring them to heel. We begin our podcast with historian Greg Nestroff, who takes us on a journey down abandoned railway tracks, where we meet a descendant of the most revered Doukhobor in history. Nestroff, that's a Doukhobor name, is it not?
Well, it's an honorary Doukhobor name. My great-grandfather was from a family of Ukrainian Baptists, and he married a Doukhobor, and his children were raised as Doukhobors.
Okay, so I got a bit of a task here for you, Greg. Can you give us a Coles Notes version on Doukhobor history?
Well, that's all I can give you. You can't recount 4 centuries of history in a single podcast. But briefly, the Doukhobors are a sect of Russian immigrants who came to Canada in waves starting in 1899 with the help of the Quaker movement and the famous novelist Leo Tolstoy.
The author of War and Peace, correct?
Yeah, and the Doukhobors metaphorically would know plenty of both war and peace. My forefathers, the Doukhobors, practiced a form of religion which rejects the literal Bible and the need for intermediaries like priests. They believe God is within, and they don't bother with churches or temples.
Dedicated pacifists as well, correct?
Yeah, and that put them at odds with Tsarist Russia. So 120 years ago, thousands of them immigrated to what is now Saskatchewan. But it didn't last.
Well, Saskatchewan's a pretty beautiful place. Why not?
Well, the Doukhobors again found themselves in conflict with government regulations such as land ownership. And to be honest, they didn't love the climate of the prairies either. So their leader, Peter Verigin, who was just let out of exile in Siberia, bought huge swaths of land in the more temperate Kootenay boundary region of southeast BC.
So how'd they do when they arrived?
Initially, they thrived. And they transformed places like Castlegar and Grand Forks in the Slocan Valley into lush farms and orchards, factories, and collective homesteads. And so the Doukhobor people are ingenious farmers, and up to the Depression, they did very well, and their numbers blossomed. In fact, in many parts of the Kootenay boundary, there was as much Russian spoken as there was English.
Hey, should we worry about that?
No, we're good.
Okay, when did it start to unravel?
Well, the Depression was hard on the Doukhobors, just as it was on most of society in the late 1920s. But 5 years before the stock market crash, in the mid-20s, something happened that shattered the Doukhobor way of life. Something on these very railway tracks that is still a mystery, and possibly the most violent act of terrorism on Canadian soil to this day. Something many people have tried to get to the bottom of for years.
Greg, what is this?
The train coach where Peter Verigin, they called him Lordly, where he was sitting, exploded. Probably the result of a bomb, and a bomb big enough that all but 2 of the 21 people on board were injured. And 9 of them died, including Verigin and his latest companion, 20-year-old Mary Sterlaeff. More on her later. Plus the local MLA and 6 others.
And this happened in the Kootenays. Where exactly?
On the tracks between Castlegar and Grand Forks, almost 100 years ago, around a place called Farron.
Have you been there?
Yeah, several times. There's a bit of a shrine there. And most recently, I went there with Peter Vasilyevich Verigin's great-great-grandson, J.J. Verigin. He's in charge of the group that many Orthodox Doukhobors belong to.
Basically, when we used to be kids, we used to walk all the way up here, and we would have a little bit of a morning prayer service, like what we call a sabrania. And the men would read the prayers, the women, and we'd sing. There was a little plaque set up here where the body was found. Господи, благослови. Речет Христос ученикам своим. Не прославляется Сын Человеческий, славлет Отца Своего. Бог прославляется в Нем, Он прославляется в Боге. Оба прославляются.
When we arrived, JJ said a prayer in Russian. Doukhobors never forgot the explosion that happened here, and until very recently, they made yearly pilgrimages to Farron and the small memorial that marks what happened here.
It must have shattered them. In the Kootenays, just over a decade, and already their leader is blown up?
Yeah, it did, Mitch. JJ told me that it divided Doukhobors even more than before the blast, and they were plenty divided even in 1924.
Yeah, it was a tragedy. It unsettled the Doukhobor community in Canada, which had just moved from Russia. And so, yeah, it was a difficult time.
And he was, Peter Vasilyevich, was your great-great-grandfather?
That is correct, yes.
Do you have any guesses about what happened?
Frankly, Greg, no, I don't. There's actually a murder mystery site set up by a professor from the University of Victoria, where there's a list of potential suspects ranging everywhere from the Ku Klux Klan to members of his family, the Canadian government, the Sons of Freedom, other Doukhobors. So what raises questions in people's minds is the fact that it still has not been solved, and records have disappeared or have not been made available to members of the family, to organizations. We even had the Human Rights Commissioner from the United Nations looking into this affair, and all to no avail.
But you don't have a particular theory or a hunch what happened that night?
All I could speculate is that the people that committed this act did not like the vision that Verigin had for his people, and the lifestyle, the way of life that they tried to live here in South Central British Columbia.
Okay, let's unpack some of this century-old mystery. Firstly, what is it potential suspects didn't like about the Doukhobors?
For one thing, their way of life, their communal existence. Back when they first arrived in Saskatchewan, it was that communal way of living that irked the government. At first, they gave the Doukhobors communal land because they wanted settlement of the prairies. When the Doukhobors refused to swear an oath of allegiance, though, and that was a condition for granting final homestead titles. The government began demanding the land back. Here's JJ again.
And so 6,000 of our people ended up moving to British Columbia between 1908 and 1913. It was the largest internal migration within Canada up to that time. And here they bought land with borrowed money and ended up constructing the largest experiment in communal living undertaken in North America up to this point in our history. Some people didn't like that. And of course you had 1917, the Russian Revolution. And so authorities, these intelligent people that we call authority, had difficulty discerning between communists and communalists. They thought our people were communists because we wanted to maintain our culture, our language. Authorities still thought we were commies.
Wait a second. Is someone suggesting the federal or provincial government planted that bomb?
Yes. Government has long been a suspect in the explosion, especially among older Doukhobors who didn't trust authority and refused to send their kids to government schools or pledge allegiance to a flag. The government has always been a suspect. Doukhobors were early conspiracy theorists, and for good reason.
But how about those internal divisions within the Doukhobor group themselves?
Well, that's where the other prime suspects come in. Many people believe the explosion was an inside job. Like so many religions, Doukhobors fractured into sects. Some were Orthodox, some were radical. The most visible, though, were the Sons of Freedom, Mary Braun's people from the start of the podcast.
When our people came to BC, there was those that, because of their hard work in developing the land, they could not come to part with it, and they wished to develop some kind of compromise with the government. And so they remained and fulfilled the demands of Canadian authorities. And they came to be known as the Independents, meaning that they were independent from Verigin's communal group. So that was one group. They stayed in Saskatchewan. When our people moved to British Columbia, together with the communalists were a group that later came to be called the Sons of Freedom, that came to be known for their depredations, arson, nudity. And so all Doukhobors were kind of upset when the public regarded them according to the actions of a small minority.
So you've got at least 3 factions within the Doukhobors, including the Sons of Freedom, plus a controversial lifestyle of communalism and a fresh revolution in Russia. And we haven't even gotten into Verigin's immediate family.
Who would be the prime suspects there?
Verigin had a challenger in his own son, Peter Petrovich Verigin. He openly called his father a liar and a cheat and claimed he had nothing but an eye for young girls. The younger Verigin was ordered back to Russia by Peter Sr., where he was raised, but not before uttering death threats. The younger Verigin, though, would go on to lead Canadian Doukhobors for over a decade after his father died. Many Doukhobors saw him as a prime suspect. Then there was Verigin's longtime companion, Anastasia Holubova, who was also a suspect. She might have felt threatened with Verigin's association with the 20-year-old woman he was traveling with, Mary Strelayev, who died alongside him. And then there's the mysterious Russian watchmaker, Dan Grenner, who had many aliases and who some think built the explosive device. The reason for the bomb, though, and who the target was, is a matter of lots of speculation.
Wow, it's like a game of Russian Clue.
It is. The death of Peter Verigin is one of the greatest mysteries in Canadian history. And assuming that it was the result of a bomb, to this day, it's the bloodiest unsolved murder in Canada.
So does J.J. Verigin have a theory who might have killed his great-great-grandfather?
Nothing conclusive. He's heard the theories and offers this.
There were so many different circumstances at play. This was 6,000 people meeting a new situation. And this was an individual that was insured to look after their well-being. He did the best he could. And it's interesting to consider what may have been had he not been killed. Yeah, it would have been a different world for our community at any rate, perhaps even for the larger community.
Do you think we will ever solve this mystery?
Lordly's death or how we should be living?
Both.
I think one will help to solve the other.
Do you see irony in that a pacifist religion went through the kind of turmoil that it did in the last century?
You know, the only irony that I see in that is how frequently it seems to happen in historical terms. When something that good is eliminated and things that are not so good follow. I mean, you look at the martyrs in every faith tradition to answer that question.
Greg, what an incredible story.
It's the story of a fascinating group of people, and it's likely a big part of the reason I have such a passion for local history. The history in this area is just so rich.
Greg, thanks so much for this. You'll find Greg's history buff writing in our magazine, and he's also got an incredible book. Tell us where you can find it.
Oh, it's available in local bookstores, and it's called Lost Kootenays, A History in Pictures, and it actually has some Doukhobor content in there.
Okay, thanks so much, Greg. What a tale. As Greg mentioned, the Doukhobors were known for their industriousness. Well, I shouldn't say were known, they are known. They are still very much an active, dynamic diaspora of Russian heritage. Graham Tracy found proof of that when he visited one of the longest-running mills in the Kootenays. It's a place where the sky is the limit, literally. And the future, well, it's made out of wood.
So we're just entering the mass timber plant. This is our finger joint line here. All of our wood comes from the sawmill.
Chris Kolesnikoff strides through his company's brand new mill. It's huge. Airplane hangar huge.
Once the panels have been fully fabricated, we then fly our panels over to our 12-foot wide sander, where we sand the top and bottom of the product.
The Kolesnikoffs are convinced the world is ready for a whole new way of building, using wood, the way concrete and steel is used. It's called mass timber, and the Kolesnikoffs are banking on it being the future.
Mass timber is large-scale pre-engineered wood products that's used in the construction industry. So in our facility here, we focus on two types of products that fall under mass timber. That's CLT, cross-laminated timber, and glulam, which can be used in glulam beams, columns, or floor plates.
At a time when BC lumber mills were shutting down, the Kolesnikoffs invested in a $35 million cutting-edge mill between Castlegar and Nelson. Materials and experts had to be brought in from Europe and beyond as a pandemic raged across the world.
It was an added complication that we were really getting everything up and running in the middle of COVID with equipment that was coming from Europe at a time where there was a lot of constraints on travel.
Crystal Seed Kolesnikoff says the family has always been about adding value to wood. They run a specialty sawmill with over 1,000 different products. Now, they're embarking on their boldest expansion yet, mass timber.
Well, I think that it's about valuing the resource that we have and taking it to the next level, continuing to add value to it. And we've always had an entrepreneurial spirit, and we see this as the future of our industry, and we wanted to be part of that.
To understand what the Kolesnikoffs want to be part of, we need to take a trip to the University of British Columbia and look up, way up.
Brock Commons is an innovative mass timber hybrid building and student residence at the University of British Columbia. Brock Commons is currently the tallest contemporary hybrid mass timber building in the world.
UBC had a chronic shortage of student housing. So, 4 years ago, they began building an 18-story residence and gathering place primarily with wood. Literally, a wooden high-rise. The giant floor panels and beams were craned into place like Lego blocks. The Kolesnikoffs took notice.
Wood was used in the Brock Commons project because wood is a good building material. Fundamentally, that's why we used it. It's strong, it's sustainable, it's locally sourced.
We've always been value-based, not volume-based. And that's something from my grandfather to my dad to us. Every chapter of our business has included moving more and more towards value-added.
The Kolesnikoffs family goes back 85 years in the lumber business. Their great-grandfather and his two brothers set up portable mills in the bush. They sawed up rough-hewn timbers for growing towns around Castlegar. They prospered.
The family really started as horse logging, so would head up and build a camp and head up on a Sunday, log all week, work all week, and then come out on Saturday and spend a day in town with the family and head back up. So just really hardworking roots, and it was a way, a means of survival at the beginning, and I think, just turned into a real entrepreneurial opportunity for our family.
The mill business has been passed down through the generations. Chris Kolesnikoff began helping out at 10 years old. The younger Kolesnikoffs say their Doukhobor heritage played a big role in their upbringing and work ethic.
We grew up driving in the truck with my grandfather, listening to choir music. That was what he used to play. And we had all the good traditional food. When we'd have customers come and visit us, we would have, my grandmother would make the spreads of the borscht and the pirihia, and he liked to share the food and the culture with people. And then we also grew up like going to Russian preschool, speaking Russian a little bit with them. So that was definitely a part of our culture growing up and part of our community.
It was definitely, be hardworking, work with your hands, work in a community, give back to the community. So I think a lot of those things are in our bloodlines for sure.
The Kolesnikoffs now have 40 separate mass timber projects completed or on the go, including the highest apartment building in Canada made of wood, an affordable housing high-rise in Vancouver. They're working on everything from daycares to commercial office buildings, Texas to Castlegar.
Now, this is a really exciting job. This is one of our first jobs that we started delivering late last year. It's Bayview Elementary, so it's in Vancouver, an elementary school that's been designed for post-disaster relief, and we're really looking forward to seeing kids walking through the halls of this building really soon.
Well, obviously, what we're proud of is the sustainability of it. The carbon impacts of a wood product is something that's very important. The construction industry as a whole is one of the largest greenhouse gas emitters, and I think being able to substitute in some cases steel and concrete for timber is such an important aspect for the future of our well-being and our environment.
My great uncle had the tagline that we still use today: "Take care of the land, and the land will take care of you." And I think that it was a good line, in that we could then start to apply to different parts of our business, where it's take care of your community, and your community will take care of you. Take care of your people, and your people will take care of you.
The Doukhobor Heritage Retreat Society is a non-profit designed to preserve Doukhobor heritage and promote values of peace and harmony. The Society has carried out this important cultural work since the 1990s. They've been funded in the past by the Columbia Basin Trust's Community Development Program. The program supports the efforts of Basin residents to address community challenges and seek out new opportunities. The Columbia Basin Trust supports people and ideas in the Columbia Basin.
Industriousness is a part of Doukhobor culture. So is peace. Their way of life was founded on pacifism, and it's part of what brought Doukhobors to Canada over a century ago, as we discovered when we toured the Mir Centre For Peace in Castlegar.
This is the Mir Centre For Peace, and the important thing about the name is that Mir means world, peace, and community. It's a Russian word, a very ancient word. And the reason that this is the Mir Centre is because of that threefold meaning.
Linda Wilkinson, along with her late husband Myler and others, helped restore a century-old Doukhobor farmhouse and turn it into a center dedicated to the study and pursuit of peace. The center hosts lectures and guest speakers and is a classroom for peace studies.
Peace is a very important concept to Doukhobors. I think it was June 29th, 1895, the Doukhobors made a real stance for peace, and it has inspired certainly people around the world when they find out what they did. So this group of people in the rural areas of Russia decided that they were going to really follow the commandment, "Thou shalt not kill." And their leader at that time encouraged them to completely rid themselves of all their weapons. So they, in 3 different places in Russia, Doukhobors gathered and burnt all of their firearms, and they rededicated themselves to that idea of "Thou shalt not kill." They were vegetarians from that time on, And that was just a very important thing that they believed in and they suffered for. They were persecuted, beaten, exiled, imprisoned for those beliefs, and eventually in 1899 the first group of Doukhobors came to Canada because they really could not live according to their beliefs in Russia any longer.
That's our podcast. It wouldn't happen without the Columbia Basin Trust, our sponsor. We thank them. Bob Keating writes, produces, and edits the Headwaters. Tara Cunningham is our story editor, along with Vince Hemsall. Stacy Machowski is our designer. Jesse Lee writes and performs the groovy music. And Peter Moynes is our photo editor, and you can see fabulous photos from our podcast on our website. Greg Nesteroff and Graham Tracy were our reporters, and I'm Mitchell Scott. Thanks for listening.